Hi everyone! Now that you've learned about different types of angle relationships, now we're going to combine that with algebra and we're going to solve equations to find actual angle measurements. So in each one of these problems, we need to first identify what is the type of relationship between the angles. Are they complementary? Are they supplementary? Are they vertical angles, etc.? And then we'll figure out how to write an equation based on their relationship. So in number one, in this picture, we can see that these two angles are supplementary because they're forming this straight line, right? It's actually a linear pair. So we're going to write down here that you could either write either one, that they're a linear pair or supplementary. I'm just going to write here that they are a linear pair. And then, therefore, that means that they add up to 180 degrees. So that tells us what our equation needs to be. So we go and we notice that angle A is x plus 50, angle B is 5x minus 20, and we're just going to write an equation that tells us that those two angles add up to 180 degrees. So x plus 50 plus 5x minus 20 equals 180. From here, it's just algebra. You guys know how to do this. We solve equations. We're going to combine like terms, and then we're going to get x alone. So we get 6x plus 30. Then we're going to isolate x. So I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. And finally, we're going to divide by 6. So we get x equals 25. So we put that down here. And if x is 25, now we're going to take 25 and we're going to plug it back into these expressions to find out what a and b are. So if we do 25 plus 50, that tells us that angle A is 75 degrees. And if we plug in 25 right here, well, 5 times 25, that's 125. Subtract 20, that's 105 degrees. It's always a good idea just to take a quick check at the end and make sure the relationship is true. Did these two end up being a total of 180? And they are. So good check that we did a good job. All right, on to the next one. In this picture, you can see we have complementary angles, and we have our two angles here, our two expressions for the angles. And since they're complementary, let's write this down. That means that they have a sum of 90 degrees. So that tells us our equation. We're going to add up our two expressions. So we have 2x squared plus 20 plus 3x squared plus 25, and that's going to equal 90. So you might notice we have a quadratic equation here because we have x squared. So we get a good practice of solving a quadratic. We're going to combine our like terms, add the constants, and let's start isolating x squared. So we're going to subtract 45. X squared equals 45. Divide by 5. X squared is 9. And when we take the square root of both sides, we can see that x is plus or minus 3. So we had this come up one other time this year where x was a positive and negative number. And right now we do need to write both of those down because x doesn't represent a particular angle or length of something. And so it's okay for it to be negative right now. So x is plus or minus 3. Now, when we think about finding e and b, we will decide if we need to use both the positive and negative to get those answers. Okay, so to find angle E, we're going to plug in our x value into this expression. Well, I can see if I plug in positive 3, that's going to become 9. And if I plug in negative 3, that's still going to become 9. So the two answers of positive and negative 3 don't affect this angle measure. So either way, it's 2 times 9. That's going to be 18. And then 18 plus 20. So angle E is 38 degrees. And let's do the same thing for angle B. So we're going to plug in 3. Again, if I plug in positive 3, I get 9. If I plug in negative 3, I get 9. So 9 times 3 is 27, and 27 plus 25 is 52. And let's do our quick check. Do these add up to 90 degrees? And they do. So good job again. Okay, for number 3, let's pay attention to the two angles that have an X in them. So we're looking at this one and this one. So those two angles are vertical. Those are vertical angles. And we know that all vertical angles are always, each pair of vertical angles are congruent. So when we write our equation, we can set this expression of 2x plus 5 equal to this expression of 3x minus 33. So there we go. All right, I think you guys can solve this one by yourself. Just do the solving, find out what x is, and then we'll come back together in a second. So pause the video, practice that solving by yourself, and I'll see you in a second. Okay, hopefully when you solved that, you got that x was 38. And we want to figure out now how we're going to use that to find y. So let's hop over to our diagram and figure out what those two angle measures are. So if we plug 38 right here, 2 times 38, that's 76. And then we're going to add 5. So that means that this angle right here is 81. I'm just going to label that right here in the diagram. So this is 81 degrees. And the other one should be 81, but let's just check our work on that. So 3 times 38, that's, 3 times 30 is 90, 3 times 8 is 24, that's 114, and then 114 minus 33, 4 minus 3 is 1, oh, it's 81. So both of them are 81, which is a good little check. Now we have to figure out how that's going to help us to find y. Well, if we look at these two angles, so the 4y minus 1 and this, either one, but this 81 next to it, those two together make a linear pair. They're supplementary. So now we're going to actually write a second equation. Hopefully you can fit this in. Hopefully I gave you enough room. I know I don't really, but we're going to squeeze it in here. So we're going to take that second part, 4y minus 1, and we're going to add that to 81. Because the total of these two angles is 180. Okay, so now let's solve that equation. So on the left side, we have 4y plus 80 equals 180. And let's subtract 80 from both sides. So 4y is 100, and divide by 4. And y equals 25. It's a good thing that was an easy equation to squeeze in there. So we found out that y is 25. Notice I'm not putting degree measures because I didn't, this is just for x and y, not what the actual angles are. So x is 38 and y is 25. All right, on to number 4. So here we're talking about angle B and angle D. So we've got this angle and this angle, and those two angles are vertical, which means they are equal. Well, the angles are congruent, the measures are equal. And when we write our equation, we're going to set them equal to each other. So we get 4x squared plus 4x minus 20 equals 3x squared plus 2x minus 5. And we have another quadratic equation. This one's going to be a little bit harder, but not too bad. We have x squared on both sides. Let's go ahead and gather that up. So I'm going to try to do this and not show every single step, but I'm going to subtract this from both sides and bring that over here. That will just make x squared. I'm going to subtract that one and bring it over. That leaves me with 2x. And I'm going to add that and bring it over, and that gives me minus 15. That way I won't have to write all that down. So now this one's a little harder than the last quadratic we did because we have in this quadratic equation, we have an x term. We don't just have an x squared. So I can't just isolate my x by taking the square root of both sides. So we actually are going to factor this one. This is a factorable one. So to review factoring, I know it's been a while for you. We're going to factor this like this. You're going to split up x squared. We're going to split up negative 15. It could either be 1 and 15 or 3 and 5. I'm going to try, let's just try out 3 and 5. And for your signs, I wrote them in, but the way you remember the signs is you look at this last sign. If that is a positive, you would use 2 of the same signs. And then this sign would tell you which kind. But since it's negative, we just need to use 1 of each sign. And then we might have to switch it if we try it out and it's not working. So this is where, if you have a pencil, it's going to be really helpful. We need to do a little check of our inners and outers to see if this is the right setup. So my inners, that's 3x. My outers, that's negative 5x. When I add that up, I get negative 2x. What I'm looking for is that equal to this middle term? And it's not. This was positive 2x. So what that tells me is I'm going to change my signs. So I am going to flip them around. I'm going to take this plus sign and make it negative, take this negative sign and make it positive. So we just switch that. We recheck. My inners are now negative 3x. My outers are now positive 5x. And when I add that up, I get the positive 2 that I wanted. So on mine, I'm going to erase that little check now because I'm out of space. Depending on how much space you have, you can erase it or leave it. But that little check is really helpful. Okay, I'm not finished yet, right? We have it factored, but we need to still solve for x. So what's happening now is we can see that this factor multiplied by this factor equals 0. And so the multiplication property of 0 tells us that if something times something else is 0, then one of those factors must be 0. So we're going to set each of these factors equal to 0. So we're going to say, well, x minus 3, what happens if that's 0? And x plus 5, what happens if that's 0? And we just solve these teeny equations. Well, on the left, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So x is 3. And on the right, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. And we get x is negative 5. So here's my x values. But we're not quite finished yet. So my first one here is x is 3. My second one, I'm going to fill in x is negative 5. And now we're going to figure out what the angle measures actually are. Okay, let's go back over here and fill in these numbers. So if x was 3, and we're going to just fill it into this, and we'll see if we can do this in our head. So if x is 3, 3 squared, that's 9. 9 times 4, that's 36. And there was a 3 here, this makes us 12. So 36 plus 12, that's 48. And then 48 minus 20 is 28. So that's telling me that angle B is 28 degrees. And since angle D is congruent, it should work out to the same number, but we're going to plug it in and check it. That's how we're going to know we did it right. So if I plug in a 3 right here, 3 squared is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. There's a 3 here, that's 6. So 27 plus 6, that's 33. 33 minus 5, and we get 28. So now we know that angle D is also 28. And now we're going to figure out A and C. So I'm going to just draw this in my diagram. If this is 28 and this is 28, we can see a relationship among these two that makes a linear pair. So whatever, to find out C, we just subtract that from 180 or subtract 28 from 180 to find that out. So 180 minus 28, that will be 152. So now we know that angle C is 152, and angle A is the same because they're vertical angles. Okay, and for negative 5, let's see what happens when we plug that one in. We plug negative 5 right here. When I square it, I get positive 25. 25 times 4, that's 100. Put a negative 5 here, and that's negative 20. So 100 plus negative 20, that's 80. 80 minus 20, and we get 60. So we found out here that angle B with this is 60. Let's plug that into D to just make sure it worked out correctly. So if negative 5 is here, that's positive 25. 25 times 3 is 75. If negative 5 goes here, that's negative 10. So 75 plus negative 10 is 65. And 65 minus 5 is 60. That's great. That's what we wanted it to be. So angle D here is 60 degrees. And if we go back to our diagram, if we have a 60-degree angle, just erase that. If we have a 60-degree angle for A and or for B and D, so if this was 60 and this was 60, that means angle C would be supplementary to that, which would make it 120. And same for angle A. So what's happening in this problem is that there's just two possible answers based on these expressions, and we got two solutions for x. That tells us that there's just two possible answers for what all these angles are. They could be 152 and 28, or they could be 120 and 60. So we do have to show all the possibilities for that. Okay, in their next question, we don't have a diagram here, but it just tells us right here in the problem that angle A and B are complementary. Well, that's pretty easy, so we write that down here. These are complementary. And that tells us, therefore, they add up to 90 degrees, okay? And then the next thing we get information here tells us that their difference is 26 degrees. Well, that's some new information that we haven't really talked about yet. What are we going to do with that? So basically in this problem, we have two pieces of information. The first piece of information tells us that angle A and angle B are complementary and they add up to 90 degrees. But the second thing says their difference, when I subtract them, A minus B is going to equal 26. So we have two variables. We haven't seen that yet. And we have two equations, which means we have a system of equations. I know it's been a while, but you know how to do this. You know how to solve systems of equations. We can either solve by substitution or elimination. This is a great setup to do it for elimination, and this is why. Elimination says you want to get them all lined up. You want your numbers all lined up. You want your equal signs all lined up, and you want each of your variables all lined up, and they are. The second step for elimination tells you that you want to have one of the variables, either x or y, or in this case A or B, be opposites. And here I have that. I have B, positive B and negative B. I already have my opposites. So I can jump right into step 3 of solving a system, and I'm literally just going to add these together. We add the equations together. Well, that's 2 A's. This cancels out. Add this together. Well, now I have an equation with one variable, and we all know how to solve that. We divide by 2, and therefore A is equal to 58. So A is 58 degrees, and angle B, if the sum of them has to equal 90, then angle B must be 32 degrees. And let's just take a moment to check this. It said that they were complementary, so we just made sure they added up to 90, and then it says that their difference is 26. If we take 58 and subtract 32, I get 26. So I can check it and make sure it's right. Now, I know it's been a while since you've talked about systems of equations. Pause the video, take a minute, and read this question again and make sure these steps make sense, because you're going to have to do one like this later on by yourself. Okay, if you have questions on that last one, just come see me during office hours, send me an email, we'll talk through it more, but I think you'll be okay also once you see some more examples today. All right, number 6. When you first read this, it's going to sound pretty complicated, but once we start writing it down, it's not that bad. So 2 angles are supplementary. Let's just add that right here, right now. That means they have a sum of 90 or 180 degrees. The measure of the larger angle is 12 degrees less than 5 times the measure of the smaller angle. That's a mouthful. Find the measures of both angles. Before I get started here, I just want to call, I'm going to say that x is my larger angle. It doesn't matter what letters you use here. You can use any letters and it doesn't matter which one, but just pick a letter. And I'm going to call y my smaller, just so I can make sure I'm being consistent in my equations. Okay, the first thing, again, tells us that the two angles are supplementary. Let's just write an equation for that. So take my two angles, x plus y, that equals 180. The second part, it says here, the measure of the larger angle is, remember is, that's an equal sign. So the measure of the larger angle, we're calling that x. So we're going to write x is, okay, let's finish out what it says here, 12 degrees less than 5 times the smaller one. So 12 less than 5 times the smaller. Well, our smaller angle, we said was y. So we're going to show 5 times that angle of y, and then it has to be 12 degrees less than that. There we go. Let's just take a moment and go back through that sentence and make sure it makes sense. So the sentence said, the measure of the larger angle, which we know is our x, is, that's our equal sign, 12 degrees less than 5 times the smaller one. So the measure of the larger is 12 degrees less than 5 times the smaller. There's that equation. So once again, we have two equations and two variables, which means we're dealing with a system of equations again. This time, we are perfectly set up to do substitution. Substitution says that you want to get one equation where one variable is alone, and we have that. We have our variable of x alone right here. We're going to substitute what x equals into the other equation. So we're going to substitute it right there. So we're going to take 5y minus 12, substituting it in for that x, then it's plus y equals 180. Once I do that, once I substitute, I am left with just one variable, and I can solve this equation pretty simply. Combine like terms, 5y plus y is 6y. We're going to isolate to get y alone, so add 12 to both sides, and divide by 6. So we found out that y is 32. We called y the smaller angle, so that's going to go over here. And then to find the larger angle, we're going to go back up and use this equation, because we said that the larger one, I could find it by doing 5 times the smaller one. So 5 times 32, that's 150, that's 160. 160 minus 12 is 148 degrees. We could have also found that angle because of the fact that those two were complementary. So if we had just taken 180 and subtracted 32, we should also get 148 degrees. And by checking it both ways, that's a way to check it to make sure we did it right. And we did. All right, number 7. In this picture, we can see we have a linear pair, and so these two angles must equal 180 degrees. So you can either write here that they're supplementary or linear pair. It doesn't really matter because in terms of the relationship, it's the same thing. So they add up to 180 degrees. All right, since this one is relatively simple, I think you should pause the video and write the equation by yourself and solve the equation by yourself, and then come back and we'll talk about what x is. So pause the video and try this one by yourself. Okay, so hopefully you got x was 36. Let's take that x value and plug it in to our expressions here in our diagram to find out what the two angle measures are. So 4 times 36, that's 144, and 144 minus 50, that's 94. And let's plug in our second one. So 2 times 36, that's 72, and 72 plus 14, that's 86 degrees. Let's take a moment to make sure that when we add these up, do we get 180? And we do. 94 plus 86 is 180 degrees, so we did a good job. All right, on to number 8. F and G are complementary. Let's go ahead and write that down. Therefore, their sum is 90 degrees, or they add up to 90 degrees. All right, and then the rest of the problem tells us that their difference is 13. So we have two different relationships happening in this problem. We know that they're complementary, but then we also know that their difference is 13. So this was one that we did earlier, one similar to this from earlier, where we had to write a system of equations. We had to write two equations. So I want you to try writing the equations by yourself this time. You can look back at that other problem if it's helpful to you. I want you to pause the video, write down the equations, and then check back in right away before you solve it to make sure that you have the correct equations written down. So pause the video and write the equations down. Okay, hopefully you have the two equations f plus g equals 90 to show that they're complementary, and then that f minus g equals 13 to show that their difference is 13. Again, I want you to pause the video and solve this. I would recommend solving by elimination because they're all lined up and ready to go. So go ahead and pause the video, solve it using elimination, and then find out what both f and g are, and we'll come back and check in. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully when you solved this equation, you found out that f was equal to 51.5. And I hope that didn't throw you off too much to realize that we got a fraction or decimal for this. Angles can be like that. Angles can be decimals or fractions. They can be part of a degree. So if f is 51.5 degrees, all we had to do was realize that when we add f and g together, they give us 90. And so by subtracting 51.5 from 90, we get that g is 38.5 degrees. And then you can double check yourself. If you just subtract these two, 51.5 minus 38.5, we should get 13, and we do. So that's our check that we did a good job on this one. Okay, there are 7 problems left. I think we have gone through at least one of each type, so there's nothing totally new in any of these questions. You've seen all the different relationships of angles. You've seen all the different ways of solving, from linear equations to quadratics to solving a system. And so I'm going to ask that you do these next 7 by yourself. There is an answer key posted on Schoology with the answers to this entire paper, but you really need to practice these before you look at that answer key. This is how we learn. This is how we grow. So I need you to, on your honor, practice these next 7 questions by yourself. And then when you're finished, go ahead and check it with the answer key. And then the rest of your assignment for today is to finish the last paper of this packet, which is called Error Analysis. So you're looking at some equations that people have already done and trying to figure out what they did wrong. Good luck.